The morning sun had only just begun to shine through the tall windows of the city's oldest music academy. The polished marble floors reflected the golden light, making the grand entrance look even more beautiful than usual. Students hurried through the hallways carrying sheet music, violin cases, and music books. Some were nervous about their lessons. Others practiced quietly as they walked. Every corner of the building seemed alive with music. Yet among all those talented young performers, there was one woman almost nobody noticed. Every morning before the first class began, she quietly pushed her cleaning cart through the empty halls. She swept the floors, dusted the classrooms, polished the wooden doors, and made sure every room looked perfect before anyone arrived. Most people passed by without even looking at her. A few gave a polite smile. Many never learned her name. She never complained. She simply smiled back and continued working. She believed that every job deserved respect, even if nobody appreciated it. For nearly 6 years, she had worked at the academy. She knew every hallway, every classroom, and every practice room better than anyone else. She knew which piano key in room 4 made a tiny clicking sound. She knew which classroom window became difficult to close during rainy weather. She even knew which students stayed late because they were working hard instead of simply trying to impress their teachers. She noticed everything. Nobody noticed her. The academy itself was famous across the country. Parents dreamed of sending their children there. Winning a place inside its classrooms was considered a great honor. Every year hundreds of young musicians applied, but only a small number were accepted. Because of that reputation, confidence filled the building. Some students were kind. Others believed that being talented made them more important than everyone else. The woman had seen both kinds many times. Whenever students gathered in the cafeteria, they talked excitedly about famous concerts, competitions, and future careers. Some dreamed of performing around the world. Others hoped to become respected music teachers. As she quietly cleaned nearby tables, she often heard those conversations. She never interrupted. Instead, she listened while continuing her work. Sometimes hearing those dreams made her smile. Sometimes they made her quietly remember dreams she once had herself. Long before she ever pushed a cleaning cart through these halls, music had been the happiest part of her life. She had grown up in a small neighborhood where money was always short. Her family lived in a simple house that needed repairs almost every year. They never had expensive furniture or beautiful decorations. But inside that little home stood one old upright piano. It was scratched. Its paint had faded. Several keys had tiny cracks. But to her, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. The piano belonged to her grandmother. Every evening after dinner, her grandmother would sit beside her and gently place her small hands on the keys. "Don't rush," her grandmother would always say. "The piano listens before people do." As a little girl, she never fully understood those words. She only knew that every lesson ended with laughter. When she made mistakes, her grandmother never became angry. She simply smiled. Every wrong note teaches your fingers where the right one lives. Those lessons became the happiest memories of her childhood. While other children spent afternoons playing outside, she often hurried home because she couldn't wait to practice another song. Her grandmother never forced her. The love of music grew naturally. Year after year, her playing became better. Teachers at school noticed her talent. Neighbors stopped outside their house just to listen through the open windows. Some even said she should one day perform in great concert halls. At first those words sounded impossible. But slowly she began believing them. Then life changed. Her grandmother became seriously ill. Medical bills grew larger every month. The family struggled just to buy food and medicine. Music lessons became a luxury they could no longer afford. Her grandmother tried to stay cheerful, but everyone could see she was growing weaker. One quiet evening she called her granddaughter to the piano. Together they played one final piece. Neither of them spoke very much afterward. They didn't need to. The music had already said everything. Only a few weeks later, her grandmother passed away. The old piano remained in the corner of the room, but the house no longer sounded the same. For many months she could not bring herself to touch the keys. Eventually, life demanded something else from her. Instead of continuing her music education, she found work wherever she could. She cleaned offices. She worked in stores. She helped elderly neighbors. Every paycheck went toward helping her family stay together. Her own dreams slowly moved farther into the background. Still, one habit never disappeared. Whenever she found a quiet piano somewhere, she would gently play for a few minutes. Not for an audience, not for praise, only because it made her feel close to her grandmother again. Years later, when she heard that the famous academy needed cleaning staff, she immediately applied. Most people would have seen only another job. She saw something different. Every day she would be surrounded by music again. Even if nobody knew how much it meant to her, that hope was enough. Her first weeks at the academy felt almost magical. As she cleaned empty practice rooms, beautiful melodies floated through the walls. Sometimes dozens of different instruments played at once. Sometimes a single piano filled the entire building with peaceful music. Instead of becoming distracted, she worked even harder. The music gave her energy. After everyone left each evening, she sometimes stood quietly outside the academy's largest concert hall. Inside stood the grand piano. It was larger and more beautiful than any instrument she had ever seen. Its polished black surface reflected the lights hanging from the high ceiling. She never touched it. She simply looked at it from the doorway, for a few silent moments every evening. Then she returned to her work. One evening, while checking that every chair was neatly arranged, she noticed something unexpected. The concert hall was completely empty. No teachers, no students, no visitors. The grand piano stood alone beneath the stage lights. She slowly looked around. There was nobody nearby. Her heart began beating faster. Very carefully she walked toward the piano. She hesitated before sitting down. It had been years since she had played such a beautiful instrument. Her fingers rested gently above the keys. For several long seconds she simply closed her eyes. Then she played. Only a few quiet notes. Nothing complicated. Nothing meant to impress anyone. The melody flowed naturally, just as her grandmother had once taught her. The empty hall filled with soft music. Every note seemed to echo through the room like an old memory returning home. She smiled without realizing it. For the first time in many years, she felt completely peaceful. When the short melody ended, she quietly stood up. She gently closed the piano lid exactly as she had found it. Then she picked up her cleaning supplies and returned to work. She never imagined anyone had heard her. Unknown to her, someone standing just outside the hall had paused for a brief moment while walking past. The person listened for only a few seconds before continuing down the hallway. No words were exchanged. Nothing was mentioned the next day. Life continued as usual. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The academy grew busier than ever because its biggest annual showcase was approaching. Students practiced from early morning until late evening. Teachers reminded everyone that important guests would soon arrive. Families had already reserved seats. Music critics were expected to attend. A world-famous concert pianist had accepted an invitation to judge the performances. Excitement spread throughout the academy. Students spoke of little else. Everyone wanted to make a perfect impression. As preparations continued, extra decorations appeared throughout the building. Fresh flowers were placed near the entrance. The concert hall was polished until every surface shined. Even the smallest details received careful attention. The woman quietly worked longer hours than usual to help everything look perfect. Nobody asked her to. She simply wanted the academy to shine on its biggest day. The evening before the showcase finally arrived. The building was filled with nervous excitement. Students practiced one final time. Teachers hurried between rehearsal rooms. The organizers checked every seat, every light, and every microphone. Everything seemed ready. Then, without warning, a loud gasp echoed from one of the rehearsal rooms. People rushed toward the sound. Within moments, worried voices filled the hallway. Something unexpected had happened. The opening performer, the Academy's brightest young pianist, had accidentally injured his hand during the final rehearsal. Silence spread through the building. The biggest performance of the year was only hours away. No one knew what would happen next. The news spread through the academy faster than anyone expected. Teachers hurried from one room to another. Students gathered in small groups, whispering to each other with worried faces. The opening performance had always been the most important part of the evening. It was meant to welcome the audience and set the mood for the entire showcase. Now the student chosen for that honor sat quietly in the medical room with his right hand wrapped in a bandage. The academy director spoke with the music teachers one after another. Can someone else take his place? One teacher shook his head. They've all prepared different pieces. Another sighed. There isn't enough time for anyone to learn his program. Someone suggested changing the order of performances, but that created new problems. The guest judge had received a printed schedule. Hundreds of audience members were already expecting the evening to begin exactly on time. Every solution seemed to create another problem. The atmosphere became heavier with every passing minute. Outside, workers finished placing flowers near the entrance. The lights around the stage were tested one last time. Families had already started arriving in the city. Some had traveled for hours just to watch their children perform. Inside the academy, however, nobody felt ready. The woman continued cleaning the hallway outside the concert hall as quietly as always. She could hear worried conversations through the open doors, but she kept working. She believed the teachers would find an answer. It was not her place to become involved. As she emptied a wastebasket near the stage, one of the younger teachers walked by, rubbing his forehead. "We need someone to sit at the piano for 5 or 6 minutes, he said to another teacher. Just enough to give us time to reorganize everything. The second teacher laughed tiredly. Unless one of these flower pots can play piano, we're out of luck. They both smiled for a second, though neither one truly found the situation funny. Just then another instructor noticed the woman standing nearby with her cleaning cart. Trying to lighten the mood, he smiled and said, "Maybe she could help us. She spends more time in this hall than anyone." A few people chuckled. Nobody meant to be cruel. They simply believed it was an impossible idea. The woman lowered her eyes and continued wiping the handrail without saying a word. The conversation moved on, or so everyone thought. A few minutes later, the academy director quietly walked into the hallway. Unlike the others, he did not laugh. He remembered something. Months earlier, one of the evening security guards had casually mentioned hearing beautiful piano music after closing time. At the time, everyone assumed one of the students had stayed late to practice. Now that memory returned. The director looked toward the woman. "May I ask you something?" She looked surprised. "Of course. Have you ever played the piano?" She froze for a moment. The hallway suddenly felt much quieter. Finally she answered honestly. "A long time ago." "How long?" "Many years." One teacher smiled politely. "Probably just a few lessons as a child." She gently shook her head. "My grandmother taught me almost every day until she became ill." The teachers exchanged uncertain looks. The director spoke again. "Can you still play?" She did not answer immediately. "I don't really know." "You don't know?" "I haven't performed for anyone." "So you've never played here?" She hesitated again. "Only once or twice, when the hall was empty." No one seemed angry. Instead, they looked curious. The director pointed toward the grand piano standing on the stage. "Would you mind showing us?" Her eyes immediately filled with worry. "No, I couldn't. You don't have to perform. I haven't practiced properly in years. We only need to hear a little." She slowly shook her head. "There are so many talented students here. They have worked for years. I clean the floors. I don't belong on that stage." The director answered softly. "Today we are not asking about your job. We're asking about your music." She looked at the piano across the room. Her hands felt cold. So many memories rushed back at once. Her grandmother smiling beside the old piano. The tiny house. The final lesson. The years that followed. She had spent so long believing that part of her life had ended that even imagining herself on a stage felt impossible. "I might disappoint everyone, she whispered. The director smiled kindly. Then you'll simply play a few notes, and we'll thank you. One of the teachers quietly added, no one expects a concert. Another teacher nodded. We only need something gentle while we rearrange the program. She looked around the room. Nobody seemed to be making fun of her anymore. They were simply hoping. After a long silence, she slowly nodded. I can try. The director smiled with relief. That's all we're asking. The rehearsal hall became completely quiet. Only a handful of teachers stood near the stage. She slowly walked toward the grand piano. Each step felt heavier than the one before. She had cleaned around this instrument hundreds of times. She had admired it from a distance almost every evening. Now she was about to sit in front of it. She gently pulled out the piano bench. For a moment she simply rested her hands in her lap. Then she closed her eyes. The room remained perfectly still. Finally her fingers touched the keys. A soft melody floated through the hall. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. Just calm, warm music. Within seconds every conversation stopped. Teachers who had been checking schedules slowly turned around. One by one they looked toward the stage. The melody continued. Every note sounded gentle and honest. Carried no sign of fear. Only quiet feeling. The director stood perfectly still. He had expected someone who remembered a few old songs. Instead, he heard someone who understood how music could speak without words. When the short piece ended, silence filled the room. Nobody clapped. They were too surprised. The woman immediately stood up. I'm sorry, she said nervously. I'm out of practice. One teacher blinked. Out of practice? Another whispered almost to himself. That was beautiful. The younger instructor who had joked earlier looked embarrassed. I didn't expect. He stopped speaking. He didn't know how to finish the sentence. The director walked onto the stage. I have one more favor to ask. She looked worried again. What is it? Tomorrow evening. He paused. Would you be willing to open the showcase? Her eyes widened. No. The answer came almost instantly. I can't. The audience doesn't expect a full concert. They're coming to hear the students. You would simply begin the evening while we prepare the revised schedule. She shook her head again. There will be hundreds of people. I've never played in front of strangers. What if I make mistakes? The director smiled. Everyone makes mistakes. She looked at the polished floor. I'm not one of your performers. No, he replied gently. But you are a musician. Those words stayed in her mind. A musician. Nobody had called her that in many years. She almost didn't recognize the word anymore. The teachers left her alone for a few minutes so she could think. She walked slowly through the empty concert hall. Rows and rows of seats stretched out before her. By tomorrow night, every chair would be filled. Families, students, teachers, the guest judge, music lovers from across the city. She imagined herself sitting alone under the bright stage lights. Her heart raced. She quietly walked toward one of the back doors. Part of her wanted to refuse and go home. Life had been peaceful because nobody expected anything from her. If she performed, everything might change. Or everything might fall apart. As she stood near the exit, she remembered something her grandmother had once said after a difficult lesson. People don't remember perfect notes. They remember honest hearts. She smiled faintly. Those words had comforted her many times. Perhaps they still could. The next afternoon, the academy filled with excitement. Guests began arriving in elegant clothes. Students adjusted their formal jackets and dresses one final time. Parents searched for their seats. The guest judge entered the building and received a warm welcome from the staff. Backstage, everyone hurried to finish the final preparations. The woman stood quietly in a small dressing room that had been prepared for her. She wore a simple but neat dress borrowed from one of the office staff. She looked at herself in the mirror. She hardly recognized the person staring back. A teacher knocked gently. They're almost ready. She nodded without speaking. Her hands trembled slightly. Outside, the audience settled into their seats. The lights slowly dimmed. The announcer stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Welcome to this year's annual music showcase. Warm applause filled the hall. The announcer smiled. Before tonight's performances begin, we have prepared a short piano introduction. No name was mentioned. Most people assumed one of the Academy's teachers would appear. The stage lights focused on the grand piano. Backstage, the woman took one slow breath. She quietly stepped forward. As she walked into the light, confused whispers spread across the audience. Some students stared in surprise. Several people recognized her immediately. Isn't she the cleaner? The whispers grew louder. No one understood why she was walking toward the piano. She sat down calmly without looking at the audience. The hall remained filled with quiet curiosity. Then she gently placed her fingers on the keys. The very first note echoed through the room. And in that single moment, every whisper disappeared. The first note floated gently through the concert hall. It was soft enough that many people leaned forward without even realizing they had done so. The whispers that had filled the room only seconds earlier disappeared. The audience expected a few simple notes, nothing more. They believed the Academy had asked a member of the cleaning staff to fill a few minutes before the real performances began. No one expected anything unforgettable. The woman kept her eyes on the piano keys. She did not look at the crowd. She did not search for approval. She simply listened to the sound beneath her fingertips. Her hands moved naturally, as if they had been waiting years for this single moment. The melody was calm, carried warmth instead of speed. There was no need to impress anyone. Every note seemed to breathe. The huge concert hall became so quiet that even the smallest sound could be heard. People stopped shifting in their seats. Children who had been whispering to their parents suddenly became still. Teachers standing near the side curtains exchanged surprised looks. The Academy director folded his hands together and quietly smiled. He had hoped she would play well. He had never imagined she would fill the entire room with such peace. The guest judge, seated in the front row, slowly lowered the program booklet that had been resting in his hands. Until that moment, he had been preparing to make notes about the evening's performances. Instead, he found himself listening with complete attention. The music slowly changed. The gentle opening became richer. New harmonies appeared one after another. The melody grew wider, carrying both happiness and sadness at the same time. It sounded like someone telling the story of an ordinary life without speaking a single word. Some audience members closed their eyes. Others watched her hands move across the keyboard with growing surprise. There was nothing dramatic about her movements. She remained calm. She never lifted her hands high into the air. She never tried to entertain the audience. Everything she played felt honest. One teacher whispered to another, "How could we never know?" The other quietly answered, "Because we never asked." Near the middle rows, several students who had laughed when they first saw her walk on stage now looked down at their own hands. They remembered every time they had walked past her without saying hello. They remembered speaking loudly about famous musicians while she quietly cleaned nearby. None of them had imagined she understood every conversation. None of them had imagined she loved music as deeply as they did. One student quietly whispered, "I feel ashamed." His friend nodded without taking his eyes off the stage. "So do I." The performance continued. The melody became brighter. It no longer sounded like someone remembering the past. It sounded like someone discovering hope again. The woman finally forgot where she was. The audience disappeared. The lights disappeared. The fear disappeared. In her heart, she was no longer sitting inside the Academy. She was back inside the small house where everything had begun. She could almost see the old upright piano. She could almost hear her grandmother laughing after a missed note. For a brief moment, it felt as though the years between then and now had simply melted away. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence. Not because she wanted applause, because every lesson she had ever learned returned naturally. She remembered her grandmother saying, "Don't rush," so she didn't. She allowed every note to finish before beginning the next. The result was something no one in the audience expected. The music felt alive. In the front row, an elderly woman gently wiped tears from her eyes. Her husband noticed. "Are you all right?" She smiled. "This reminds me of someone I lost many years ago." He quietly reached for her hand. A father sitting nearby looked toward his young daughter. She had just begun learning piano 6 months earlier. Usually she became restless during concerts. Tonight she had not moved once. Without looking away from the stage, she whispered, "I want to play like that someday." Her father smiled. "Then remember what you're hearing." Backstage, students waiting for their own performances stood silently around a small monitor showing the live stage. No one practiced. No one spoke. Even those who had spent years competing with one another forgot about winning. They simply watched. One of the violin teachers quietly said, "Technique can be taught." He paused before continuing. "But this," he looked back toward the stage, "this comes from living." The guest judge continued listening without writing a single note. His expression had changed completely. Earlier that evening he expected to evaluate performances with careful attention to rhythm, timing, and interpretation. Now he found himself forgetting about scores altogether. He listened as a music lover instead of a judge. The melody slowly reached its highest point. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Its strength came from its sincerity. Every note seemed to carry years of quiet patience, years of sacrifice, years of working while keeping a dream hidden deep inside. The audience could not know her entire story, but somehow they could feel pieces of it through the music. That was enough. A young teacher standing beside the curtain quietly whispered, "She's telling us something." Another teacher nodded. "And she's doing it without saying a single word." The woman finally opened her eyes for a brief moment. For the first time she noticed the audience. Hundreds of faces looked back at her. Yet instead of making her nervous, something unexpected happened. She saw kindness. No one was laughing. No one was whispering. Everyone was simply listening. That gave her courage. She smiled softly and continued playing. The final section of the piece arrived. It returned to the same gentle melody with which everything had begun. But now it sounded different. The notes carried quiet confidence, like a person who had walked through many difficult years and finally found peace. The hall remained completely silent, not because people were bored, because nobody wanted to interrupt even a single note. The final chord slowly filled the room. It echoed gently beneath the high ceiling. Then everything became still. Her hands rested quietly above the keys. She allowed the last sound to disappear naturally. Only then did she lower her hands into her lap. Silence remained. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. She wondered if perhaps she had disappointed everyone after all. Then someone stood. It was the guest judge. Without saying a word, he began clapping. The sound echoed through the quiet hall. Another person stood. Then another. Within moments, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause became louder and louder. It rolled across the hall like waves reaching the shore. People smiled through tears. Some students clapped until their hands became red. Parents looked at one another with amazement. Several teachers simply shook their heads in disbelief. The woman looked around in complete surprise. She had expected polite applause. Nothing more. Instead, she saw hundreds of people standing. She placed one hand over her heart and bowed her head. The applause continued. It refused to stop. The academy director quietly walked onto the stage. He did not interrupt the audience. He simply stood nearby, smiling proudly. After several long moments, the applause finally became softer. The woman prepared to leave the stage. She believed her part in the evening was finished. But as she stood, the guest judge stepped forward. He climbed onto the stage before anyone could stop him. The audience became quiet again. He extended his hand toward her. She looked surprised before gently shaking it. He smiled warmly. "Thank you," she answered softly. "I only came to help." He looked at the piano, then back at her. "You gave us much more than help." The audience listened carefully. He continued speaking. "Tonight I expected to hear talented students." He paused for a moment. "Instead, before the program even began, I was reminded why people fall in love with music in the first place." The hall filled with another wave of applause. The woman lowered her eyes, feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. She had never imagined anyone would say such words about her playing. The guest judge then asked a simple question that surprised everyone. "May I ask where you studied?" She smiled gently. "I didn't." He looked puzzled. "You never attended a music academy?" She slowly shook her head. "My grandmother taught me at home." The judge remained silent for several seconds. Then he smiled once again. "I would very much like to hear the rest of your story." The audience sensed that something even more remarkable was about to be revealed. And for the first time in many years, the woman felt ready to tell it. The applause continued even after the guest judge stepped away from the microphone. Many people remained standing. Some smiled with excitement. Others quietly wiped away tears. The woman looked around the hall, still trying to understand what had just happened. Only an hour earlier, she had been checking chairs and wiping dust from the stage. Now hundreds of people were looking at her with admiration. Felt unreal. The academy director walked beside her and quietly said, "Please stay for a few minutes." She nodded. The audience slowly returned to their seats, but no one seemed eager for the evening to continue just yet. Everyone wanted to know more about the quiet woman who had appeared from nowhere and filled the hall with such beautiful music. The guest judge picked up a microphone again. "I hope you will forgive me," he said with a smile. "But before we continue with tonight's program, I believe everyone here would like to know the person behind that performance." The audience answered with warm applause. The woman looked slightly nervous. She had never spoken in front of so many people. The director gently encouraged her. "You only have to tell your story the way you remember it." She took a slow breath. "There isn't very much to tell." The judge smiled. "I think there is." She looked across the audience. Many of the students who usually hurried past her every day were now listening with complete attention. She spoke softly. "My grandmother loved music more than anything." The hall became quiet again. "We never had much money. Our house was small and our piano was old. Some keys didn't sound quite right anymore." A few people smiled gently. "But to my grandmother, it was the most beautiful piano in the world." She paused for a moment. She believed music wasn't about owning expensive things. It was about sharing what was inside your heart. The audience listened carefully. "She taught me every evening after dinner. I made many mistakes." She smiled at the memory. "Whenever I played the wrong note, I expected her to stop the lesson. But she always laughed." Several people in the audience smiled too. "She would tell me that every mistake was simply another step toward learning." The guest judge nodded quietly. Those words sounded simple yet deeply meaningful. The woman continued, "I dreamed of studying music one day. I wanted to keep learning. I thought I would spend my whole life playing the piano." Her smile slowly faded. But life had other plans. The hall remained completely silent. "My grandmother became ill. We spent everything we had trying to care for her. There wasn't enough money left for lessons. My family needed help. So I found work." She did not speak with sadness, only honesty. "I believed my dream had ended." One student sitting near the front slowly lowered his head. He had often complained whenever practice became difficult. Now those complaints felt very small. The woman continued, "After my grandmother passed away, I couldn't even look at the piano for a long time. It reminded me too much of her. I thought if I stopped playing, the sadness would become easier." She smiled gently. It didn't. Several people quietly nodded. Many understood exactly what she meant. The memories stayed. "So one day I sat down again. I played only for a few minutes. And somehow it felt like she was still teaching me." The audience remained completely focused. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. The story had become just as powerful as the music itself. The guest judge finally asked, "Then how did you come to work here?" She looked toward the stage floor. "I needed a steady job. When I heard the academy was hiring cleaning staff, I applied." "Were you disappointed?" He asked the question gently. She thought for a moment before answering. "No." The audience looked surprised. "I was thankful. I couldn't study here, but I could still hear music every day. She smiled. Some people thought I was only cleaning the building. But to me, she looked around the beautiful concert hall. I was also protecting a place filled with dreams. Those words touched many hearts. Several teachers quietly looked at one another. None of them had ever considered that someone could love the academy so deeply without being a student or instructor. One music teacher remembered countless mornings when she had already polished the practice rooms before anyone arrived. Another remembered seeing fresh flowers carefully arranged before important events. She had always worked with pride. Now they finally understood why. The guest judge asked another question. Did you ever wish someone would discover your talent? She smiled and slowly shook her head. No. The answer surprised everyone. I only wished I would never forget what my grandmother taught me. If I could still play once in a while, that was enough. The judge looked thoughtful. You never wanted applause? She laughed softly. I hadn't even imagined applause. The audience laughed warmly with her. I simply loved the piano. Nothing about her answer sounded rehearsed. It was the simple truth. The guest judge turned toward the audience. I have listened to musicians all over the world. I have heard people perform in famous concert halls. I have judged international competitions. He paused. Tonight reminded me that music does not belong only to professionals. It belongs to anyone who plays with honesty. The audience applauded once again. Several students felt those words deeply. Many had spent years worrying about winning competitions, earning higher scores, or becoming more famous than others. For the first time, they began asking themselves a different question. Had they forgotten why they started playing in the first place? Backstage, the student whose injured hand had caused the unexpected change watched everything on a small monitor. At first, he had blamed himself for ruining the evening. Now he smiled. If my accident hadn't happened, he whispered quietly, none of us would have heard this. One of his teachers gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes unexpected moments become the most important ones. The showcase finally continued. Student after student performed with great care. The audience applauded every performance. But something had changed. Instead of comparing performers, people listened more carefully. They paid attention to emotion instead of perfection. Even the students felt different. The atmosphere had become warmer, more supportive, less competitive. During the short intermission, groups of parents gathered in the lobby. Nearly every conversation centered around the woman at the piano. I've never heard anything like that. I can't believe she worked here all these years. How did nobody know? One elderly visitor smiled. Perhaps we were all too busy looking in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, the woman quietly returned to a small room backstage. She hoped to stay out of the attention. She sat alone for a few peaceful minutes. The excitement outside felt very far away. A gentle knock came at the door. Come in, she said. The academy director entered with 2 cups of tea. I thought you might like this. She smiled gratefully. Thank you. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, the director broke the silence. I owe you an apology. She looked confused. For what? I've worked beside you for years. I always respected how hard you worked, but I never asked about your life. He looked down at his cup. I only saw your uniform. She smiled kindly. You weren't the only one. He looked at her. I should have known there was more to your story. She answered gently. We all pass people every day without knowing what they carry inside. The director nodded. I don't want that to happen again. A few minutes later, another knock sounded. This time it was the guest judge. He stepped inside with a warm smile. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, the director replied. The judge looked toward the woman. I've been thinking about your performance since the first note. She listened quietly. I believe your journey isn't finished. She smiled politely. I'm happy simply doing my work. I know, he answered. But I also believe gifts like yours should be shared. She looked uncertain. What do you mean? He reached into his briefcase and removed a neatly folded invitation. In 3 months, A charity concert will be held to raise money for children who cannot afford music lessons. He placed the invitation gently on the table. I would like you to perform. She stared at the paper without touching it. I can't stand beside professional musicians. The judge smiled. After tonight, he paused. I think many professionals would be honored to stand beside you. She looked at the invitation again. Her heart filled with both excitement and fear. The possibility seemed far beyond anything she had imagined. She thought her journey had ended years ago. Now, for the second time in her life, a new door had quietly opened. Whether she had the courage to walk through it was a question only she could answer. The invitation remained on the small table long after the academy director and the guest judge had left the room. The woman looked at it without opening it. She could still hear the applause from earlier that evening echoing in her mind. It was something she had never expected to experience. Even now, it felt as though it had happened to someone else. She gently picked up the envelope and turned it over in her hands. A charity concert. Professional musicians. A large audience. The thought alone made her nervous. For years, she had lived a quiet life. She cleaned classrooms, greeted people with a smile, and returned home every evening without anyone paying much attention to her. Now everything seemed to be changing. She wasn't sure she was ready. The next morning, the academy looked different. Not because the building had changed, because the people inside had. As she walked through the front entrance with her cleaning cart, several students smiled and greeted her. Good morning. She smiled back. Good morning. It was such a simple moment, yet it felt completely new. A student who had once rushed past her every day stopped beside her. I wanted to thank you. She looked surprised. For what? For last night. He smiled. I've been studying piano for 8 years. I've won competitions. But your performance reminded me why I started learning in the first place. She answered softly. I'm glad. He hesitated for a moment. I also wanted to apologize. She looked at him kindly. You don't need to. I do. He lowered his eyes. I've walked past you hundreds of times. I never even asked your name. She smiled gently. Then today is a good day to start. He introduced himself with a warm smile. For the first time, they spoke like two people instead of a student and a cleaner. Similar conversations happened throughout the day. Teachers thanked her. Office staff congratulated her. Even parents who had attended the showcase stopped to shake her hand when they visited the academy. She appreciated every kind word. But inside, she remained exactly the same person. She still arrived early. She still cleaned every hallway carefully. She still believed no job was too small. During lunch, the academy director found her arranging books in the library. I hope all this attention isn't becoming too much. She smiled. It feels a little strange. I understand. He paused before speaking again. Have you thought about the invitation? She looked toward the window. A little. And I'm afraid. He nodded. That makes sense. What if I disappoint everyone this time? He smiled. You weren't trying to impress anyone last week. No. Then don't start now. She laughed quietly. That sounds easier than it is. It probably is. He smiled back. But I believe you can do it. That afternoon, after finishing her work, she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter explaining that the concert would raise money to provide music lessons and instruments for children whose families could not afford them. She read one sentence twice. Every child deserves the chance to discover the joy of music. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the old piano. She thought about how easily her own dream had almost disappeared because life became difficult. She quietly folded the letter. If this concert could help even one child continue learning music, perhaps it was worth facing her fears. The following morning she called the number printed at the bottom of the invitation. A cheerful voice answered. I would like to accept. There was a short pause before the person replied with excitement. We're so happy to hear that. As the weeks passed, life became busier. She continued working at the academy during the day. In the evenings, One of the piano teachers offered to let her practice in the concert hall after everyone had gone home. She accepted gratefully. Every night she sat at the grand piano. Sometimes she practiced difficult passages. Sometimes she simply played the songs her grandmother had loved. The teacher never interrupted. He quietly listened from the back of the hall. One evening he finally said, "You know something?" She looked up. "I've taught piano for nearly 20 years. She smiled politely. "I'm sure you've taught many wonderful students." "I have." He nodded. "But you're teaching me something too." She looked surprised. "What could I possibly teach you?" He smiled. "That music isn't only about perfect notes." She laughed softly. "I think my grandmother would agree." As news of her performance spread beyond the academy, local newspapers wrote short stories about the quiet cleaner whose hidden talent had surprised everyone. People recognized her while she walked through the city. Some simply smiled. Others thanked her for sharing her music. She never expected such kindness. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, a young mother approached her. Beside her stood a little girl holding a small keyboard book. "I'm sorry to bother you," the mother said. "You aren't bothering me. My daughter watched your performance online." The woman looked surprised. "It was recorded?" The mother smiled. "It has been shared thousands of times." The little girl stepped forward shyly. "I started practicing every day after watching you." The woman bent down slightly. "Really?" The girl nodded. "I thought I wasn't good enough." She smiled warmly. "You don't have to be the best. You only have to keep learning." The little girl hugged her music book tightly. "I will." That simple conversation stayed in her heart for many days. She realized something important. People were not inspired because she was famous. They were inspired because her story felt real. It reminded them that dreams do not always disappear. Sometimes they simply wait quietly. As the charity concert approached, rehearsals became more frequent. Musicians from different cities gathered to prepare. At first she felt nervous standing beside performers with years of professional experience. But they welcomed her kindly. No one treated her as an outsider. One violinist smiled during rehearsal. "I've heard your story." She looked embarrassed. "It's nothing special." He shook his head. "It is. Most people think success happens overnight. You remind us that it often grows quietly for years." Another musician added, "You also remind us to respect everyone we meet." The rehearsals became enjoyable. They laughed together, shared meals together, encouraged one another. She realized that true musicians cared less about fame than people imagined. Most simply loved creating beautiful music together. One evening, after rehearsal, she returned to the academy to collect a few forgotten papers. As she walked through the hallway, she noticed several children sitting around one of the practice rooms. They were waiting for their parents after beginner lessons. One little boy looked at her. "Are you the lady who played at the big concert?" She smiled. "I suppose so. Will you play something?" She looked around. The nearby classroom contained an upright piano. She sat down and played a simple melody. The children gathered quietly around her. When she finished, one little girl asked, "Can anyone learn that?" She smiled. "Anyone who is willing to practice." The children looked excited. She spent the next 20 minutes showing them a few easy notes. Their laughter filled the room. A teacher passing by stopped at the door and watched. The children were not only learning music. They were learning confidence. After the lesson ended, the teacher walked over. "You have a gift." She laughed. "I know how to play the piano." "I'm not talking about that." He smiled. "You make people believe they can learn." Those words stayed with her. A few days later, she spoke with the academy director. "I've been thinking." He looked up from his desk. "About what?" "There are many children who can't afford lessons." He nodded. "Yes, I would like to help." "How?" "If the academy allows it." She hesitated. "I'd like to teach free beginner classes one evening each week." The director smiled immediately. "I was hoping you'd ask." She looked surprised. "You were?" We've already received letters from families asking if you might teach. She laughed in disbelief. I've never been a teacher. You've already started becoming one. Within 2 weeks, the first class began. Only 6 children attended. Some had never touched a piano before. Others borrowed instruments from neighbors because their families could not afford one. She welcomed every child with the same smile her grandmother had once given her. No one here is expected to be perfect. The children relaxed immediately. We're here to enjoy learning. Every lesson ended with laughter. Every mistake became another opportunity. Exactly as her grandmother had taught her years before. Word spread quickly. 6 students became 12. 12 became 20. Parents often waited outside the classroom just to hear the children practice. The academy, once known only for training gifted musicians, slowly became known for something else as well. It had become a place where everyone was welcome. One quiet evening after class, the guest judge returned to visit. He stood outside the practice room, listening to the children laugh while learning their first songs. When the lesson ended, he smiled. I thought your performance changed one evening. He looked around the happy classroom. I was wrong. He paused before continuing. It was only the beginning. She smiled softly. For the first time in many years, she no longer wondered whether her dream had ended. She understood that it had simply grown into something even more meaningful than she had ever imagined. The morning of the charity concert arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. The concert hall was larger than the one at the academy. Musicians from different cities had gathered early to prepare. Volunteers arranged flowers near the stage, checked the lights, and welcomed guests as they entered the building. Backstage, the woman quietly sat beside the piano, looking at the music she planned to perform. Her hands were calm. Only a few weeks earlier, she would have been trembling with fear. Now she felt something different. She wasn't thinking about the audience. She wasn't thinking about applause. She was thinking about the children who would receive music lessons because of this event. That thought gave every note a purpose. The guest judge walked over with a warm smile. I had a feeling you would be here early. She smiled. My grandmother always said arriving early gives your heart time to settle. He laughed softly. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. They stood quietly for a moment, watching volunteers move around the hall. Finally he said, Whatever happens today, thank you. She looked surprised. I haven't even played yet. You already made this concert special. She smiled but said nothing. Soon the audience filled every seat. Families, teachers, students, and music lovers came together for one reason: to help children discover music. The evening began with several wonderful performances. Each musician brought something unique. Some played lively pieces that filled the hall with energy. Others chose slower melodies that touched people's hearts. The audience applauded every performer warmly. Then the announcer stepped onto the stage once again. Our next performer has reminded many people that talent can be found in the most unexpected places. The audience smiled immediately. Many already knew who was coming. As she walked onto the stage, she noticed something that made her pause. Several of the children from her free music classes were sitting together in the front rows. The moment they saw her, they smiled and waved. She waved back gently before taking her seat. The hall became quiet. She rested her hands on the piano. For just a second she closed her eyes. She whispered a few words so softly that only she could hear them. Thank you, Grandma. Then she began. The first melody floated through the hall like a gentle breeze. Carried warmth, hope, kindness. As the music continued, every memory from the past seemed to blend into the performance. The old upright piano, the tiny house, the evenings filled with laughter, the difficult years, the quiet cleaning job, the unexpected invitation, the standing ovation, the smiling children learning their first notes. Everything had become part of her journey, and now every part of that journey could be heard in the music. People listened without distraction. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled quietly. No one seemed interested in checking the program or looking around the room. For those few minutes, the music was enough. When the final note faded, the hall remained silent. Not because people were uncertain, because they wanted to hold on to the moment a little longer. Then applause filled the room. It was warm, joyful, and full of gratitude. She stood and bowed gently. This time she understood something important. The applause was not only for her. It was for every teacher who had encouraged someone, every parent who had sacrificed for a child, every person who had quietly kept a dream alive during difficult years. After the concert ended, the organizers announced that the event had raised more money than any previous charity performance. The audience celebrated the wonderful news. The funds would provide instruments, lessons, and scholarships for many children. Several reporters approached her afterward. One asked, "How does it feel to become so well known in such a short time?" She smiled thoughtfully. "I don't think about being well known. What do you think about?" She looked toward a group of children laughing near the entrance. "I think about making sure they never have to give up their dreams." Another reporter asked, "Will you leave your cleaning job now that so many opportunities are opening for you?" She paused before answering, "I'll always be grateful to the Academy. It gave me work when I needed it most. It also gave me a place where music stayed close to my heart." A few weeks later, the Academy invited her to a special meeting. The Academy director welcomed her warmly. "We have something we'd like to discuss." She listened quietly. "We've decided to create a new community music program." He placed several papers on the table. "It will offer free beginner lessons for children from families with limited income." She smiled. "That's wonderful. We were hoping," he paused with a smile, "that you would lead it." She looked surprised. "Me? Yes. You've already shown us what this program should become." She accepted with gratitude. The announcement brought happiness throughout the community. Families who had never imagined their children could learn music began enrolling. Retired musicians volunteered to help. Local businesses donated instruments. Former students returned to mentor younger children. The program grew much faster than anyone expected. Months passed, then years. The once small evening class became a lively music center filled with laughter every week. Children learned piano, violin, guitar, and singing. No one was turned away because of money. The woman greeted every new student personally. She always began with the same words. "You don't have to be perfect. You only have to be willing to learn." Parents often noticed how relaxed their children felt after lessons. No one feared making mistakes. Every small success was celebrated. Every difficult day ended with encouragement. The atmosphere reminded many people of a family instead of a school. One afternoon, a teenage girl stayed behind after class. She looked nervous. "I don't think I'm talented enough." The woman smiled gently. "I've heard those words before." "You have. Many times." She sat beside the girl at the piano. "When I was young, my grandmother told me something." The girl listened carefully. "Music isn't a race. It's a conversation. If you listen carefully and play honestly, you're already doing something beautiful." The girl smiled. "I'll remember that." Several years later, the Academy held another annual showcase. This time the woman was not backstage with a cleaning cart. She sat proudly in the front row beside the Academy director. Several of her own students were performing for the very first time. As each child walked onto the stage, she felt nervous with them. She smiled through every performance. Not because every note was perfect, because every child played with courage. Near the end of the evening, the Academy director stepped onto the stage. Before announcing the final performance, he addressed the audience. "Many years ago, we almost overlooked one of the greatest gifts this Academy had ever known." The audience smiled, already understanding who he meant. "We judged a person by the work they did instead of the dreams they carried." He looked toward her. "That mistake changed us forever." He continued, "Today every new student who joins this academy hears one lesson before they play their first note." The audience listened quietly. "We tell them to respect everyone they meet. You never know whose story is waiting to be heard." The audience applauded warmly. She lowered her eyes, feeling both grateful and humbled. After the concert ended, She walked alone through the now empty hall. The lights were dim. Rows of empty seats stretched before her. She slowly walked to the grand piano. It was the same piano where everything had changed. She gently rested one hand on its polished surface. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Then she quietly sat down. No audience, no cameras, no reporters, only silence. She played the same simple melody her grandmother had taught her as a little girl. Nothing had changed about the tune, yet everything had changed about her life. When the final note faded, she smiled softly. She looked toward the empty seats and whispered, "I hope I made you proud." In her heart, she already knew the answer. Sometimes people spend years searching for the moment that changes everything. For her, it began with one unexpected chance, one simple melody, and the courage to say yes when life opened a door she thought had been closed forever. Her story became a reminder throughout the community that talent does not always stand in the spotlight. Sometimes it quietly walks the hallways, does its work with kindness, and waits patiently for the right moment to be seen. And whenever new students asked why everyone at the academy treated the cleaners, office workers, gardeners, and visitors with such respect, the teachers would smile and answer the same way. Because every person has a story, and sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the most beautiful song of all.